This overarm guard is brand new, and we'll talk about that. I mean, obviously, this is going to make you feel even safer, right? Because your hands can't even go into where the blade is. But you can't use this at all times. There are some cuts where you have to actually move this out of the way. Okay, so let's start with that. Let's just move this out of the way for a minute. The reason why I wanted to switch to that, typically what we do is we put the board next to the blade and we set the blade height. So if you don't have one of these, this is how you do it. You set the blade height where, Aiden?
Right at the top of the wood.
So one tooth is above the board, just like that. So we minimize the danger. You could use it with the blade up that high, but if you don't have an overarm guard like this, then you probably should lower the blade so that you only have one tooth above. However, you do have to have pressure on the top of the board with your thumb because the teeth, when they're going back into the table, they're coming really straight forward and they want to push the board this way and the back teeth want to lift the board up. So you have to put a little pressure on the top. With the overarm guard, what we're going to do is we're going to raise the blade like this. Now that looks scary without the guard over it, but with the guard over it, your hands can't get near it. Now what happens is look at the teeth. The teeth in the front are heading down. So that helps hold the board down. Now I don't even have to put any pressure on the top of the board. I could actually just push from the back and it's gonna hold the board down by itself. When we're using the overarm guard, we're gonna have the blade higher and that's gonna really prevent any chance of a kickback. Let's talk about this first though. Let's lower the blade. So I've set the blade height. The second thing that you always wanna have in place, and Mr. Mercia didn't have it in place. That's what we're gonna talk about his injury right now. He didn't have this in place. What's this called? Riving knife, R-I-V-I-N-G, riving, all right? Also known as a splitter. Splitter's a little bit different. This is actually a splitter. Got these little anti-kickback feet. This used to go in here. Kickback happens a couple of different ways. One way it can happen is the board, as you cut it, it can have internal stress. If a tree grows in the woods, it's not gonna grow perfectly straight. It could, but it competes for sunlight, so it grows a little funky. So when you cut that board apart, it might have some internal stress, and one of three things will happen. As you're cutting, it's either going to stay perfectly parallel like that, which is no big deal, or it's going to try and push itself apart. That's no big deal either. The problem comes when it wants to push on itself. You're cutting it and it's trying to close up again, and this riving knife holds it open so that it doesn't bind on the blade. If you didn't have the riving knife, it could bind on the blade and kick back. You're trying to push and it's binding so much that it kicks back. So Mr. Mercia, he came in one morning and the riving knife had been taken out. Sometimes there are operations on a table saw where you don't use a riving knife. I was here over the weekend. I was making parts for a bowl and I had a different plate, throat plate in that didn't have a spot for the riving knife. It's designed specifically to help me make little tiny pieces. It's got a little ramp and the pieces fall away from the blade. Anyway, I didn't put it back in. I figured I'd put it back in on Monday morning. Well, I came in on Monday morning and I remembered, oh, I have a blood drive up in the gym. They had American Red Cross was here, so I went up to the gym, I was giving blood, and Mr. Mercia was down here giving blood. These are the actual pieces that he cut. He was cutting pieces for a play, and you can see the bottom of the piece right here. So what he was doing was this, cutting a piece of plywood, and when he got to this point, it came away from the fence, it caught the back of the blade, and it spun and went like that the first time. And then the second time, we're standing here like this, it caught and it came around and it hit him here in the finger and broke his finger in half. So he never touched the blade with his hand. If he had touched the blade with his hand, he would have been better off. The blade would have stopped instantly, right? But in this case, he didn't have the riving knife in. If the riving knife was in place right here, that board could have never come across the back part of the blade and that would have never happened. So I'm gonna put the riving knife back in. That riving knife is the most important piece of safety equipment. Even though this saw has a computer and the blade will stop, it doesn't always save you. The riving knife is really important in keeping the board from kicking back or spinning. So I've got the blade height set. I have the riving knife in. The last thing that you have to set is the fence. So come around here. I'm going to show you how we set our fence. All right, because you're each going to do this in just a few minutes. And it's really easy, but I want to show you. This handle is what loosens the fence. So we just raise that up and this loosens. This is how we measure. So even if this is in the way, we can still use this to measure. We don't have to have access to the blade with a tape measure like we do over on the radial arm saw. We don't measure with a tape measure here. We measure with this built-in tape measure. So if we wanted it to be 6 inches, we just move this red line in the bubble over to 6 inches and we lock it down. Now the distance between here and the right side of that tooth is 6 inches. This is what I use to raise and lower the blade. There is another one on this side, all right? What that one's used for is to tilt the blade. This blade can tilt all the way over to 45 degrees and anywhere in between. This is the computer. The yellow switch on the computer, you don't have to touch. Just leave that alone. If you do forget and you shut it off, the saw won't run without the switch on, okay? So make sure you just leave that up. You should have a green light. This red, big red switch, red button, you're gonna pull out on the bottom of it. That turns it on, and then you push it in to shut it off. Occasionally you might be cutting, and you might hit it with your knee, all right? And then you have to stop, wait for the blade to stop. You can't turn it right back on again. You have to wait for the green light to stop blinking and turn solid green again. If you're in the middle of a cut, when it stops like that and you hit the button, you could take the board out of the cut, or you could leave it in the cut and make sure you still have it when you turn it on. Make sure you still have your hand on it. But I'll be there with you. After I'm done going over this, what we're going to do is you're each going to do this without any power on. You're going to pretend, all right? So you're going to go through all the motions so I can see that you guys listened and you know where to hold your hands, where to, the whole process of making the cut. And if it looks like you know what you're doing, I'll have you readjust the fence and you do one live cut. Next thing, how are you going to stand? Well, you're going to stand to the left of the blade like this, all right? Your hip is going to be very close to this rail. You can't really reach from back here, all right? So you have to become comfortable with the saw, come up and stand here. Now, if there ever was a kickback, which I'm telling you, I talk about kickbacks a lot, and it hardly ever happened. It hasn't happened to any of my students since 1994. So it doesn't happen often, but I do want you to be aware of it. And we do things in case it ever happens to make it safe. Where you're gonna stand is to the left of the blade, so that if there was a kickback, that's just another precaution. It'll just fly by you. You won't be in the path. You don't wanna stand here. If there's a kickback, you get hit. If you're over here, it just goes right by you. So that's why we stand right here like this. Your left hand is gonna be your holding hand. You're gonna put your knuckles down on the table like this, and your thumb's gonna go on top. And this finger has to go against the edge of the board. You have to keep the board tight to the fence. Whether you're using that or not, this is the main objective, all right? Keep this tight to the fence. If you don't keep that tight to the fence, two things happen. First of all, you lost control of the board. Second of all, if you want this to be 6 inches, it's not gonna be 6 inches anymore, it's gonna be less. So you're not even gonna get the right size board out of it, right? So you wanna make sure that your eyes are looking here a lot. I know that all of you are going to look right there. You know, everyone watches it cut, you know, but you want to make sure that you glance over here quite often to make sure you're staying tight to the fence. Your finger's going to be behind the red, back here. So you're not going to ever go, this basically gets screwed to the table and the board goes like this. We start pushing it in. If it's a big long board, you're going to grab the side of it, you're going to feed it, you're going to grab it, you're going to feed it like that. And this hand just stays right here. This hand doesn't come off the board until you have a push stick on it. So this hand stays. I'm going to keep feeding it until the back end of the board, Danny, reaches the table. You don't want to start here and go like this because you could lift it up. But if you wait till you reach the table, then you can push down on it. It's not going to lift it up, you know. This is really long. This hand never has to get near the blade because you're only going to push it to the riving knife. So you're going to start here, somewhere in the middle, in the slight angle towards the fence. You don't want to go like this. Your hand is a little bit further away from the blade like this, but you're going to push your board away from the fence. So you want to make sure, Dan, that you're pushing towards the fence slightly. Now you start using your push stick. You can drop this hand out of the way at this point, and there's no chance for a kickback at this point. So at this point, you can turn your hips and go like that. Sometimes what I see students do is they get nervous. They go like this, they get their push stick on, and then they back up like this and go like that. Well, now, as I push, this hand's actually got to go over the top of the blade, you know, and it makes it more dangerous. So if you just get a little bit confident and turn your hip, now your hand can stay to the right of the blade all the way through. With this long of a push stick, your hand doesn't need to go near the blade at all. Okay, so we have a lot of safety precautions. The height of the blade, the way you stand, the length of this, and now I've added the overarm guard as well. I'm gonna do a live cut. Any questions about how I just did that? Aiden's gonna catch for me. The catcher only catches. They support the weight of the board. Sometimes you'll be helping a friend and you think you're helping and you like start pulling. You might pull faster than they're comfortable with, and that's not good. So don't pull. The other thing that you can do that is a real problem is if you pull the board away from their push stick, it can become a real problem, especially when you're cutting something really narrow. And you put, sometimes there's times, if you look at these push sticks, but I have wooden push sticks, and you can see it's been cut multiple times because you can run your push stick right over the top of the blade. As long as the push stick is touching the board, it's as if Both of these are the same piece. But once this comes away from the board, this is just sitting out in the air. You're like a sitting duck. So if he pulls that board away when I'm in this position, now that blade's just gonna kick this push stick back into my hand. It's a really bad situation. So as you're catching, especially when someone has to run their push stick over the top, don't pull the board at all. You guys, I mean, not this year, maybe next year, won't be making cuts like that. I will help you with those kind of cuts. As a brand new woodworker, I want you to get used to making your typical kind of cuts. And then as you become more advanced, just like in scuba, then you can do more and more, right? So the board, when you turn on the saw, you gotta make sure the board is behind the red. Board's behind the red, turn it on. Your hip goes right here. Hold the board down, make sure you're tight to the fence, and then you can start pushing it. You can go nice and slow, or you can go faster. Once you get to this point, keep this hand here and grab your push stick. All right, now what I want you to do is you're gonna keep your right hand on the board. You're gonna reach down with your left hand and pretend to turn it on. Yeah, just so you can get used to, like, because I want you to hold it with your right hand, because you're gonna have to do that if you have a 10-foot long board, Dan. All right, she's got her hand in the right spot. She got it tight to the fence. She's gonna start feeding it through. And this should be up on top like that. All right? And you're going to follow through all the way to the riving knife. You want to make sure that you push that board away from the blade. You're going to set it for 5 3/4.
Like right there?
Yeah,
Okay.
right there. Make sure it's behind the red when you turn it on. And your knuckles are going to go down. There you go, just like that. Make sure that your push stick is slightly towards the fence. You can drop that hand out of the way and finish your cut. That was amazing. That was really good. How was it on your end?
I wasn't, okay.
You were really nervous to start. Yeah, you should be looking over here anyway. You don't need to look at the blade. You should be making sure that you're tight to the fence. Yeah. That's all. All right, Cassidy, you're going to do it without any power on first. So nothing to worry about. We're just going to go through the motions, okay? So what I want you to do is put your safety glasses on. Stand the way I showed you. So you want to have it behind the red like that. And that hand's going to go like this. Just like that. And that's not going to move. That's going to stay right there, so you don't have to worry. That's not going to move. It's just going to slide by your hand. Hold it with your right hand. Reach down with this and pretend to turn it on. When you do it, you're going to pull out on the bottom of the red. Yep. And then you can't have a space here. You got to be right up against it. That hand's actually going to help hold it to the fence. And you're going to start feeding it through. And you can go slow as you want. And once the back end reaches the table, keep that left hand right where it is and grab your push stick. And make sure you grab it good. Grab it right up in the handle. Angle it slightly that way. And now at this point, you can drop your left hand out of the way. Keep the push stick up high and follow through right to there. All right, see, your hand doesn't even reach this. So your hand doesn't really go that close to the blade. It's not going to pass the red. And at this point, you can stop, and I'll catch the piece for you. And go nice and slow. It'll cut really easy. Nice job. Woo! All done. And that's the bell. So you guys, I'll see you tomorrow. We'll finish everybody else up tomorrow. All right. Thank you for being so attentive. So yesterday, you guys learned how to use this without the guard. The only difference with today is we're going to set the blade height 3 times as high, and we're going to use the guard. When you bring this guard over, make sure you just come over gently. It will stop where it needs to stop. Then I want you to take whatever board that you're using, put it next to the blade, drop the guard down onto the top, and now you're going to run it through just like you did yesterday. Remember, the main thing is you keep it tight to the fence all the way through the cut. With the blade being so high, you don't have to worry so much about kickback, but you do have to keep it tight to the fence. So your eyes should be looking here. You really can't see the blade now anyway, so you should be making sure that you're tight to the fence. So what I want you to each do is you're going to practice swinging it in, setting it up, and making your cut. The only thing I would tell you is make sure you can come closer to the saw. You don't need to be that far back. You can be right up against the saw almost, okay? Yeah. Okay, come around here for a second before we go over to the bandsaw and start that lesson. I just want to ask you guys, all right, yesterday you did it without the guard with the blade low, okay? And today you did it with the guard and the blade high. What did you like better?
First one.
Yesterday's? You don't like using the guard? No? Didn't make you feel better?
I feel like I like having a visual of where the saw is and where I'm putting the piece of wood. So like with that, it's like a little more difficult to visualize.
It's a great point. Yeah, you don't get to see where you're cutting. Sometimes that makes you feel better because you can see what's going on. That's a good point. Yeah, the orientation of the teeth is much better, and it takes a little getting used to. Even for me, having the blade that high, I'm not used to. We never did that, you know. But it definitely, I've done it all day now with all my classes, and it definitely has no chance for kickback. Because I see some kids who they don't put any pressure on top of the board with their thumbs up in the air, and there's no pressure on top of the board, and they feed it in, and there's no chatter. It just stays on the table. It holds it down automatically, basically. But you do have to remember that you have to keep that tight to the fence all the way through. That's the main thing in both cases. Okay, we will be using the guide as much as possible. All right, nice job.